Hello, I'm really live. Okay, it started without me even starting the button. So previously I had to start the button and then it would start, but now it apparently started automatically. Okay, so regardless, hi and welcome back to another episode of Karim Talks About Economics. It's episode number 26. I am very excited because, as you might have noticed, it's been a month since I last made one of these streams. And there is a proper reason for that. I think it's a more depressing reason than a good reason, to be honest with you. And that reason is that I got a little bit depressed. Got a little bit depressed after my grandmother died. She was very close to me. Um, she was 88 years old. It was not corona related. She died very peacefully. She did not suffer. She had, well, of course, she had some illnesses, but it was not something that was lethal. Um, and that was a shock for me. I looked up to her. She was a great mentor for me, and she was a great um, motivational source for me as well. So losing her was came as a quite large shock for me. But a month later, now it's not that I have to move on, but I have to live her spirit. I have to do what would have made her proud. I can't just sit here and give up and be depressed. So I'm very excited to be back on the podcast with you guys, and I hope that you might have missed me and are looking forward um, for more episodes. So, for you who do not know, Karim Talks About Economics, it's a podcast where I, the host, Karim, I talk a little bit about economics. And we're now at episode 26. So, there's a lot of episodes that you can watch prior to this one. The podcast is characterized by three main things: it's spontaneous, it's informative, and it's open minded. It's spontaneous because it's not prepared as other podcasts may be. It's more of a flow. It's also live, so that gives us the agility that is needed to tackle new ideas that come to mind. Where some podcasts may be uh, pre-filmed, some parts of it can be taken out, but here you really get everything, right? And when we have someone on the podcast, then it really becomes even more spontaneous because then it's two brains that are spontaneous simultaneously rather than only one. But that means that while I might have an idea of what I want to talk about in this specific podcast episode, we might diverge a little bit, but then we'll try to come back, right? And it's informative because, well, obviously the title. So there needs to be some added value that I add to you guys. So of course I want it to be entertaining, but I also want to give you something out of it. I also want to get something out of it myself, right? And I also want to have the people that come that are with me in the podcast to get something out of it. That's what, and that is how it's informative, right? You might hear something that you've never heard before. And if you're on the podcast, you might have to argue for something that you've never been questioned before, right? So an ideology or a mindset or something like that. And thirdly, it's open minded in the sense that I'm not driven by a specific agenda. It's not like I'm gonna close up my mind and say capitalism is the best system in the world. I'll try to be open minded to listen to other people's point of views. Usually for the podcast, there is an agenda, and I've made something new for you who've been here. So first, there is an introduction, which I've just gone through, and then there is news update, and here I talk about. Well, I don't talk. I do talk about it, but I bring the new COVID numbers that have been put out. And we also talk about what is happening around the world uh, with for instance, news agencies such as the BBC, CNN, Fox, sometimes Bloomberg, The Guardian, or things like that, to get a different perspective of things. And Al Jazeera, right? So we try to understand what's happening around the world from different points of view. We might make some comments on it, and I suppose also the second part of this podcast, right? Let me try to find it there. The news update is great for, I suppose, documenting what's happening in the world and maybe looking back at it. Maybe if we look 2 months back when I made these podcasts, we will look at the numbers for COVID and think, well, how did it explode? Well, looking at numbers, it might be difficult, but looking at the news, we might see the development, or maybe also the development in the Middle East, or the development in Russia, or how we've reached a vaccine, hopefully, right? And many other things. Now, of course, there's been a month where I didn't report on anything, so that's a lost thing, where actually a lot of things did happen. But for me, there was something that was happening closer to me that was more important than all of that. Then we have a follow-up from last time, and that is usually a question that I ask at the end of a podcast, and then I try to answer it in the following podcast. And fourthly, there is an interview, which is either with a non-existent figure. It could be myself, actually. I've thought about that. Uh, well, I am existing, but uh, I suppose that maybe I could tell you guys about my bachelor thesis, my master thesis, um, the idea for a PhD proposal, maybe, or maybe just my viewpoints on different subjects. Or sometimes we also have this guy invited, Adam Smith, and we read from the book The Wealth of Nations. Well, today he is actually with us, but he's not with us in the sense that I'm going to read from his book, but rather I'm going to read some of the bullet points that I wrote down while reading in his book in the last month. There's not a lot of bullet points, and I hope I'm going to be able to remember why I actually wrote this specific thing down, and then we'll try to argue it. And then we have a fifth point, which is where I ask the question for next time, which is where do we go from here? Usually I sum up what we've talked about in the podcast, and I ask this question, this vital question, for next time. And lastly, because this podcast is live, you actually have the opportunity to ask me questions while I do the podcast itself. So that's where I would be taking your questions. Or maybe on the social media, there would be some questions, and I will be able to take those up in the podcast. And thereby getting people more involved. Yes. So I suppose it's time to go to the news, and let's do that straight away. And I start with COVID. So as you can see, we're now at 28 million. I think last month we were at 13 or something like that. So it's quite a jump. We see. I don't know how clear this is actually. I hope it's clear for you guys. But if it isn't, I'm just going to tell you that at the bottom right and the left of the figure to your, I suppose, left, you can see the numbers of the active cases, and as you can see, 1% of those are critically ill or in critical conditions. I think that just means that they are hospitalized, and that's 1% of the cases. This percentage is actually the same as the one that we had months ago. And then you have the death rate, so the closed cases, right? So it's not 28 million that are actively sick at this point, but there has been 28 million cases. So we've tested, actually it's more close to 29. So we've tested people, and then we've gotten right? And then some of them have died, some of them has recovered, and some of them are still active. And out of those that have been closed, right? So they're done. There are nearly 925,000 that have died, so close to a million, sadly. However, we see that the death rate has gone down. It can be because of two reasons, as I've mentioned before, because either the disease is getting, COVID is getting weaker, or it is because we're testing more, right? And I hope it's because we're testing more. No, I hope, of course, it's the other one, but it's a mixture of both, right? And to the right, you can see well, the top 20 list of the most cases around the world. As you can see, as per usual, the United States is at top. Uh, Actually, it's less because it's not on my computer. I cannot see it very clearly. However, I let me try to make it. Yes, now I see it much more, much better. Okay, let me try to do like this. Yeah, like this. Okay, so the United States is at 6 million cases. Oh my God, and nearly 200,000 deaths. Well, they have 40,000 new cases, and I suppose that's not a huge change from last month. Um, so it's now more constant, I suppose. It's not increasing anymore. Um, in India, however, it has significantly increased. I would actually argue that if it has increased one-fold, right? So it's the double now. And also a month ago they were below Brazil. Now they are above at nearly 5 million cases and 1,000 deaths, 1,100 to be exact. That's quite a large number. However, the total deaths are below Brazil, right? So Brazil is still suffering 30,000 cases every day and 800 deaths. Um, Argentina is suffering with 10,000. Let me look at Mexico. I remember that country as a country with a lot of deaths. It is still a lot of deaths. 70,000 total. That's a lot. It's really a lot. And 500 a day. Now you see that France is at 10,000. That tells you what's actually happening in Europe at the moment. Europe is suffering a lot, sadly. I suppose we saw that in Spain, in Catalonia, a month ago, but now we see that the most drastic increase is in France. The UK is back at 3,000. It was down dipping at below 1,000 actually at some point, well, a month ago, right? And I just have to remove my screen a little bit to be able to see it. And Iraq has really increased. Has really increased. Iraq is 4,000 a day with 60 deaths. I'm actually quite amazed that Iraq is a country that has been able to test this much. Because I suppose other countries in the region have as many cases. However, I don't think they have the capacity to test. So I went to Egypt, right, to I suppose it's 2 or 3 weeks ago now for the death of my grandmother, and for me that was a necessary thing to do. Of course, you shouldn't go to Egypt if it's not necessary, right? But for me, I felt it was necessary. And there they are actually, of course, wearing masks more, but there I haven't heard a person who've been tested. about a person who's been tested in Egypt, right? While here in Denmark, everyone that I know have tried to be tested, nearly, right? So in Denmark, actually, I think we're at 2 million tests now, something like that. I got tested twice when I came back. I had to do that to make sure that I did not get the corona. Saudi, and now back to the graph, um, or the table. Saudi Arabia is doing pretty well, and I can tell you, you can't see it here, um, but Sweden have more cases than China now. It's only 1,000 more or something like that. It's not drastically more, but it's more. And Denmark had 341 cases yesterday. Um, I think last month we were at 19 cases, um, which goes to show how quick uh, this disease, this virus, can take over a country. And I think that's enough for COVID. Let's go. Let's go to the actual news, right? So we see here BBC. I suppose the most important news here, of course, you have this news that there is what do you call it, elections in Russia. I'm just gonna put it back to be able to see a little bit clearer and for me to be looking into the camera. Um, so yes, there is regional elections in Russia, but the problem is, which I did not report on the last month, that the opposition leader in Russia had been poisoned, and he'd been transported to a hospital in Russia first, but since it was critical, he was sent then over to Germany, and they confirmed that it was a poisoning attempt, um, and that so it's actively poisoning. So it's not food poisoning; it's actual poison. So that goes to show that maybe the regime is afraid of the opposition. However, there is elections now, and now it's interesting to see what the result is going to happen. Um, yeah, last month there was also an election in Belarus, where the new leader got not the new leader, but the previous leader that got re-elected got 80% of the votes, and that sparkled a lot of demonstrations. And the opposition, well, they were not poisoned, but it was three women. They got sent. They were heavily encouraged to leave the country, right? So that's what two of them did, and one of them ripped her passport before leaving, so she couldn't leave, and she had to stay in the country. But I suppose until this day, today, there's still demonstrations over there. So the question is this? I suppose. Well, it's interesting for us Europeans. It's interesting. Is Russia going to say the same thing? Because we know obviously um, that the opposition has some traction. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to poison him, right? There would be no reason to if his voice is not heard by anyone. So it's interesting to see if, I don't know the name of the party that Putin belongs to, but if that party gets maybe 80 or 90% of the votes, then we might start to question the democracy in Russia, and some tension might start to increase between the West and Russia again, right? Then you have another news with a migrant ship, right? It's a so there. So in the past month, because it's summer, obviously, a lot of migrants have started to go back, not go back, but have started to make the trip to Europe as per usual. of course, to a lesser degree than we saw in 2015. However, to a larger degree than we saw last year and the year before that, right? And some of them got stranded, and they were put on actually a Danish Maersk ship. So that's quite interesting. So the question is, well, what is their fate? Fate, fate. What's going to happen with them? That's a big question. So that's something that's in the news. I actually don't know if it's here as well. I don't think we're going to see it in the news today, but it was in the news the previous week, which was that you had a refugee camp burning, and here in Europe we're currently trying to donate money down there to them down there. There are some Facebook campaigns and other stuff. Third news is the burnings, not the burnings, I suppose, but the forest fires in California and Oregon in the United States of America. It's quite drastic. You saw pictures of San Francisco that was totally orange because of all the smoke and all the, I suppose, the radiation from the fire. It's not harm radiation, I suppose, but it's the radiation of the light, right? So those are the three news that are up right now. If you go to CNN, you see again the news about the fires in the United States of America, but you also see another news, which is a summit. I actually don't know which summit it is, um, but the EU has to meet up with China, and it is said that while China has created enemies, of course, obviously the United States, with the president calling it the Chinese virus, um, and also the virus, I suppose, stemming from there, and we inherently uh, really blaming China for this. Can we really say that to their face? Can we say, hey guys, we actually blame you for this disease. You have to change, or are we going to just say, nah, great business guys with maintaining it, and maybe we can learn something from you. And thanks for sending aid to us in the form of masks and in the form of syringes and in the form of other things. Right? So that's going to be interesting. And the third news here in the CNN is also. I actually don't really care about the title of the thing now, but I care about the story, which is that Britain may be leaving the EU with a no deal, and that had quite large effect on the pound, the British pound, the past week on the stock market. Now, if we go to Fox News, they are of course more concerned about what's happening inside the US, and here we see that there's still this news about Black Lives, well, I suppose not Black Lives Matter in particular, but the idea of Black Lives Matters and the demonstration and the idea whether the police should be defunded. And here you see that two deputies were shot inside their car. Um, that's of course not something that we like to see, and of course an argument that the police should be, I suppose, not more armed, but they should not take any of their funding away, because it seems like people are not treating them very well, and maybe there is a reason why there is police violence in the United States, because the police are afraid for their life. Right? Lastly, if we consider Al Jazeera, so a more Middle Eastern point of view, I suppose, or at least a different one. I suppose the main title is again something with COVID, with where Syrian refugees now have it in camps, and of course that can spread like wildfire, as we've seen in the United States, actual wildfire. Uh, can really go bad when people are clustered together and there's no way for them to get the medical care that they need, because I suppose there's no field hospitals and enough testing that is going on in war-torn Syria, right? Uh, Even though this might be happening in Jordan, still Syrian people, all of them clustered together. And if developed countries cannot maintain this disease, then how can people, and this is gonna sound very bad, but people that currently live as, I suppose, kind of in a savage environment, and I got this idea from Adam Smith, right? The word savage, which means something with no order, specific order. That's the meaning of it. That's also what I mean by this word right now. How can they maintain the COVID-19, right? You also see another news, which is you also see the news about Russia, and the other interesting news is um, the world's reaction to Bahrain and Israel normalizing ties. So we saw last month, where I did not report, that the United Arab Emirates and Israel made a new pact. That was actually the day before that I left for Egypt. I suppose that's the 13th or something like that of August. Quite quite interesting thing, right? You got a little bit a split in the view of this deal. Is it good? Well, that's what the U.S. said, and that's also what the more moderate people in the Middle East said. I suppose some Egyptians said that because I talked with them about it. And then you had the viewpoint that it is, well, those are our enemies. They have taken a part of our land. What are you doing, guys? You can't be friends with them. You can't really trust them. So you have these opposing points of view, and then you have people maybe starting to call the United Arab Emirates out for being non-Arabic, and now Bahrain is following. Now Bahrain is of course not a large country, not a large population, however, quite a rich country. So you see the rich countries looking to Israel maybe as a friend, and that's because there can be some business ties, right? So they see the business. It's not the humanitarian part of it. It's not because we want to be friends. It's because we understand this is best for business. Okay, that was all the news, I suppose, and all my reflections on the news. And I think this is it's been very long, huh? It's been very long, and that's because I've missed doing this. Okay, so question from last time. I suppose the question is, where do we go from here? And that is mostly because I have not been here for quite some time, so I don't have a question. I'm quite sure that I actually wrote a question down, but I don't remember that question. And there's no reason to remember it now because I wouldn't be able to answer it because I've not reflected on it. But where do we go from now with this podcast? Well, we go from it now that I'm going to take it more seriously. I'm going to put some effort into it, and I'm gonna try to make some great content. How about that? How often, you ask? As often as I can, preferably every day, maybe every second day, maybe every third day. There's not going to be a specific schedule for now. But I am going to return to it, and I've thought about some ideas to implement. And please let me know if you have any reflections on this as well. That would be quite appreciated. Okay. So episode 26, a lot of things have happened. And yeah, it's time to consider this guy, Adam Smith. Bam, the father of economics. Not the father of modern economics, as I wrote in my master thesis, but the father of economics and the wealth of nation. Where does the money of the country come from, right? Really difficult to say, I suppose. So I think where I left you, I actually don't think that that's where I left you, but let's say that that's where I left you. That's chapter 3 of book 4 of the extraordinary restraints upon the importation of goods of almost all kinds from those countries with which the balance is supposed to be disadvantageous. So that's the title of a chapter. Just get that in, right? 3 lines as the title. What does this title mean? It means that we want to limit trade with countries that we have a trade deficit with. Why would we want to do that? Well, he claims that that's because we have people in power that might not really understand the importance of trade, and that that because it's just in their favor, the trade balance is in their favor, it does not mean that our country is worse off, right? But let's see what I wrote down. So the restraint on legal commerce between countries led to the creation of smugglers. Makes sense. This usually happens when both sides of the trade from both sides of the trade, because neither, I suppose, wish to be the one disadvantaged from trade. So I suppose that maybe if you're disadvantaged, you'll just smuggle some. What does it mean to be disadvantaged? Disadvantaged. That means that um, maybe one banana equals one apple. One country produces bananas, the other country produces apples. Now, if I'm sending you 50 apples, but you're only sending me 48, then I'm gaining and you're losing. So maybe you're going to smuggle. I think you're the bananas, right? Yeah. You're going to smuggle 2 bananas in and then get the value of those two in the black market, right? So, and then I suppose I have a quote here which says, we cannot always judge of the value of the current money of different countries by the standard of the respective mints. And then I have a clarification here. In some periods of time, the value of the money is not in perfect condition and might not be worth that much in our modern fiat currency. And then even more, Adam considers this in respect to the foreign trade and the value of gold and silver money between countries. So I suppose the idea here is that, and it's a very basic idea really, it is that maybe one gold coin can buy 5 bananas in one country, but buy 10 in another country. Does that mean that and let's say that bananas here are the basket of goods. It's the entire basket of goods. It's the only thing you need for survival, right? It's both the banana pays for your house rent, it pays for your food, it pays for your children to go to school, it pays for everything, right? So that means that one gold coin in one country is better than a gold coin in a different country. That means suddenly that the gold coin is not worth the same in two countries. Is that true? Or is it the currencies that are not that, or is it the value of the banana? It's difficult actually to say. It's not a, yeah. Suppose suppose it means that the gold is not valued the same, or maybe it's because there is less gold in one country than the other. And that's a big problem, right? Um, and that's the basic start of the exchange, right? You will suddenly have an abundance of gold in one country than the other. And when you have an abundance, it means that you have a lot. Your gold will be less valued. Uh, but then if you go to the other country, you can suddenly buy more because they have less gold than you. It doesn't mean because you might still have the exact amount of bananas. You just have more gold circulation, more money in circulation. Right? And another point is many discussions about the value of gold in England versus France, and the change of the minting regulation such to change the exchange rate between the British gold and the French one. I suppose it's the same idea. And then I wrote that bank money is preferred to common currency because bank money may come with rent and is more flexible. So bank money is the banknotes that we discussed a month ago, maybe even more than a month ago. And what they were was I have some money in the bank, or I lend some money from the bank, and they give me a note that this is £100, but I have to pay it back maybe as 5 grams of gold, but then I have to pay it back as 5.5 grams of gold. Then I send that over, and the idea is that the one who originated this banknote has to pay it back to the bank, and if he doesn't, then this banknote is invalid. Why then is this banknote more valued than the common currency, so just gold going around? Well, firstly, because the banknote is supposed to increase in value, right? Because it's kind of a loan. And secondly, because uh, it can come at any different value. It doesn't have to be a fixed amount. So it's not because one coin is one coin. No, you can write it at whatever amount you wish, I suppose. Okay. And after that, he starts to talk about the accountability of banks, where he says that banks are held accountable with uh, burgomasters that change every year. And their job is to measure the amount of gold in the banks and compare it to that is written in the books, right? So the bank, such that the bank money is actually has the value that we're talking about, and that they are not just that the banks are not lying, right? That's also important because while the individual might not give it back to the bank might just say, well, yeah, we got it, and then continue, right? even though they are losing money in the short run, their bank money is being used, and the other banks may go out of business or something. And then I wrote here that this arrangement of the borough masters is the same as what's happening in the central banks nowadays, and that is, I suppose, true because right now, if I remember correctly, um, the American Reserve, you have one chairman, I suppose, and other people that sit in the board, and it's not that the entire board is changed once at once, but they are it's not even that they are rotated, but one goes in and then another comes in. One goes out, the other comes in, while the others are the same, and then another person has. So every position has to be changed every 7th year, but there is a year in between that they have to be changed, and therefore you create trust because the other people. How can I explain this? Well, let's say you have 5 people. One of them goes in and another one comes in, right? So let's use 2 hands here. If all of them cannot steal, because then there's a new person that comes in and then tells them, hey guys, you stole. And then another person goes in and another person comes in. Well, those person would have had to tell this person, okay, we're gonna steal again, but then this person goes in, it goes out, and another person comes in. It becomes a little bit difficult to create a game where you create this contract. It's very difficult to create a contract, or at least a binding contract between people that are rotated when it's not everyone uh, that is changed at once. Because if those people are changed at once, well then the other people comes in and well, firstly those people can maybe agree at this instantaneously. Okay, we're not gonna not everyone. No one is gonna figure out that we stole. Then the other people come in. Okay, we trust that the other people didn't steal. However, our books are bad. Okay, let's try to find out why, right? But when only one goes out, um, and another one comes in, it's difficult. I suppose this is not a good argumentation from my point of view. Um, I apologize for that. Maybe I don't understand it myself very perfectly. I need to read up on that. However, the idea is that it's more difficult to create a binding contract when only one person moves out and then another one comes in, and it happens in this rotational manner. Um, and with those and then I go back to Adam Smith here. The idea is that here you create trust by having these borough masters every single year that are not the same, right? Because you don't know who's voted out. Um, and then he says that the bank earn money with various fees and encourages a balanced account and discourages small transfers. And Adam brings into consideration various ways of doing that, various fees. So maybe a withdrawal fee and money in, a fee for transferring money from one account to the other, and things like that. So that's how the bank earns its money. Um, And another argument, and then he goes back to the idea of bank money and common currency, and he says that bank money is more stable because it's something that which value we've agreed upon, right? So £100 sterling, and that's it. While common currency may change. So gold coin may change what you actually want for it today and what you want for it tomorrow. Um, and then he goes on. So a trade budget with a specific country need not be balanced the entire time, which I said, yeah. He also says that gain from trade occurs when countries sell the surplus of their native produce to other countries to replace the capital that has been spent in their commodities production. And that makes perfect sense. So we've produced corn. Great. We've eaten what we've eaten and everything that we could eat, but we have some leftovers. What are we going to do with these leftovers? Because no one in our country wants it. So we're going to sell it to another country, right? And by that, we might earn back the money that we've spent on the farmers or the machinery that have gone in producing, and the rent of the land that has gone in producing this corn, uh, this wheat. I also remember another thing that he says, which is that with foreign trade, well, or opening up for foreign trade is a good thing, because if the good is valued more in the foreign country, right, then sell it to the foreign country, take the money that you get back, and then spend it on goods that you actually want more, right? Because if you can get 10 gold coins for a banana, and these 10 gold coins you can spend on maybe producing apples that are more valued at home, that would be even better than selling the bananas at home if they are kind of worthless, right? Um, and then he goes on, in foreign trade, it is better to trade with commodities than to buy with gold and silver. And that is the case because the money that comes from selling the native commodity in a foreign country goes to the producers of the commodities, who can afterwards reinvest it. The gold and silver would have been better invested in native and home. So I suppose that's an argument for producing gold. However, no goods are sent abroad, but those for which the demand is supposed to be greater abroad than at home, and of which the return, it is expected, will be of more value at home than the commodities exported. I suppose that's the argument that I just made, right? We're not going to sell a product abroad if it brings us less money than we could have got for it at home. Um, that makes sense. And but why is it better to trade with commodities than trade with gold? Um, I suppose because with the freedom of gold, you can spend the money as you wish. Uh, but with these products, you need to get rid of them, and therefore it's better to trade with them. To some degree, it's a valid argument. Um, and there might occur situations where foreign trade with gold and silver might make the country richer when conducted correctly. Yeah, okay. And then there's something interesting that he says here. He says that people are more drunk in countries where beer and ale and wine is dear. However, people in Spain and in countries that produce wine are more sober. And for fun, I said that that is also the case today, where we see people in Scandinavia are the ones that are the most alcoholic people, even though most of the beers are produced. Actually, the beers are produced here in Europe, here in northern Europe, Scandinavia, Carlsberg. However, the wines are not produced here. And why does that hold? Well, he says because, and I don't know how this relates to economics. However, he says that when the product is abundant, you seem to maybe value it at the beginning, but as time goes on, you will not value it as much. I suppose that's the argument. That's the economic argument, right? He says that if you send a British person to Spain, he would be very drunk at the very beginning, but as time goes on, he will start to adapt and he will become more sober than he might have been in even Britain. And that holds even today. And I suppose that's because there is a status symbol that is associated with something that is expensive. So if wine is expensive in Europe or in Northern Europe, then you might want to buy it to show off. But you wouldn't do that in Spain because it's quite normal, or in France because it's quite normal, right? I don't know how strong that argument is. However, it does, I suppose, hold to some degree um, with normal things as well. I suppose caviar was quite abundant in the old times, and it was even prison food. But now it's become a delicacy, maybe because it's less abundant, right? Okay, let's see a different thing that I wrote down. So it's wrong. It's wrong in foreign. It's wrong in foreign trade to see the other nations gain as your another nation's gain as your loss. Okay. So commerce, which ought naturally to be among nations, as among individuals, a bond of union and friendship, has become the most fertile source of discord and animosity. Okay, so I suppose that's an argument for why we should not see foreign trade as a yeah. It's been a while since I've read this and wrote this down, so bear with me here. Um, So that's an argument for trade. So commerce, which ought naturally to be among nations as among individuals, a bond of union and friendship, has become the most fertile source of discord and animosity. So we've started to hate each other because of trade instead of, and maybe also, yeah, I remember that he also talked about politicians here using it as in rhetoric, right? Um, oh, we have a trade deficit with X country, they are bad. However, it should be a bond of friendship because trade between individuals, when scaled up, is just a trade between nations, right? So you have something that I want and I have something that you want. Let's trade. The difference we're gonna make up with money, right? Or maybe something else. Right? Then he has an argument against monopoly where he says in every because there is a fear that well, firstly, it might be monopolies that are decreasing uh, foreign trade, because once you allow for foreign products to enter the market, then you suddenly don't have a monopoly anymore, right? So in every country, it always is and must be the interest of the great body of the people to buy whatever they want of those who sell it the cheapest, right? So that's a Bertrand competition that we want. We want prices to be low. We want people to compete on the prices. I want to buy something, I'm going to buy it for the cheapest price as possible. Then I wrote, home producers may wish to maintain their monopoly on the home market and try to minimize the importation of foreign goods through tariffs and the such. Okay, so that's the same exact argument that I just said. Okay, so to make money, so how to make money, I suppose. Where little wealth circulates, there is little to be got, but that where great deal is in motion, some share of it may fall to them. So that's. I'm just gonna write here a note. That's actually an. It's actually an argument for urbanization that Adam brings, and he says that people or poorer people leave leave rural areas to go into urban cities, I suppose, because there's a lot of money that goes about, goes from one person to another, to a third, to a fourth. That means that between those trades, I suppose, or those transfers of money, maybe I can come in between and gain something, gain a profit, right? While in smaller cities or in rural areas, money is only transferred, or money is transferred more slowly. And when it's transferred more slowly and less frequent, there is less points at which I can actually come in between. And of course, I'm going to add some value with my labor. However, I will not be able to get something, right? There's less chance that actually people are going to trade with me. Okay. And then a point here. Even though North America is as rich as France, France has less poor people, so there's a better distribution of wealth, and therefore it's better to trade with France than the U.S. because their buying power is larger. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you have a population where distribution of wealth is quite bad, or quite unequal, so the Gini coefficient is high. Maybe I'm gonna make a podcast on that. If you have such a thing, that would mean that only people at the top will demand products, but people at the bottom will only demand some certain products, something for the basic subsistence. But if you could create a more equal society, maybe everyone is going to demand televisions. Maybe everyone is going to demand iPhones and phones in general, right? Rather than a society where only 10% demand the phones, right? And even if you have an unequal society and it's still very wealthy, then some of them may, at the very top, well, I want a private jet. Okay, fine. How many private jets are you going to produce, right? Does it create wealth for me to produce those private jets and sell them to you? Well, yes, but maybe not as much as it would have been for me to produce 50,000 phones, right? Profit might be the same, however, the amount maybe of hands that goes into producing this is not the same, right? So only 10 people are producing this airplane, and let's say 50,000 are producing the 50,000 iPhones. Of course, wrong ratio. However, that's the argument, that it's better for me to trade with a country such as France than the US. And I even think I suppose, well, firstly, the distribution is true, because we see that there is a large difference between the Gini coefficient of France and the United States of America, where the United States of America has a very large Gini coefficient, larger one than France. So maybe it is still better to trade with France than the United States. Okay. And then I wrote, even though countries have tried to fight foreign trade, it seems like it has not worked, as it always brings more wealth with it. So foreign trade always brings more wealth. However, no country has created free trade. Right? Well, you had, I suppose, Hong Kong, burnt down now. Not burnt down, but really closed off the world right now. And you have Singapore, I suppose. You have countries that try to make it. Free trade means that there's no tariffs. And then you have Adam Smith that says that Holland is the closest one to it. However, it's not close to free trade, right? So Holland at that point, which is a part of the Netherlands now, I actually don't know if it was two separate nations at that time. Regardless, Holland is very close to that, and I suppose, I don't know if that holds true today. However, we know that Rotterdam is the largest port in Europe, right? So that goes to show that Holland has maintained uh, the position of a country that wished to trade with the world. Okay. And then he says that maybe the balance of trade is not as important as the balance of production and consumption. So the balance of production and consumption um, is the balance that I produce this much and I consume this much. If that's the case, well, then this part I'm going to earn something from, right? Maybe that's the value added to the economy or something like that. And then then we go on to a different chapter, which is called off drawbacks. And you'd think that drawbacks means that it means the bad things that come with trade, but it's not. It's basically what you can get back from taxes in the form of tariffs. And then he says that some laws of the foreign trade can be specialized on the specific produce where the duty cost can be avoided. So I suppose that's if a country is in real need of, let's say, and that doesn't happen because it's a luxury product, but tobacco, then the price or the tariff on tobacco would go down, such that the flow of trade goes into that country, right? So suddenly it becomes cheaper to sell tobacco to that country, or the profit that you get gets larger because you're probably going to sell it to less. So you're going to sell it over there. Sell it to less, of course, but you're going to earn more because of the tariff, right? Then he says, however, still some stupidity is done in the sense that, uh, then he says we, but that means the United Kingdom, are not willing to carry the French products even though they don't compete with our products, just because it will also profit France. So that's of course the rivalry. So that's of course the rivalry that is in foreign trade, and as we saw, um, and as I just discussed, Hmm. Yeah, the pen is leaking a little bit. Uh, as we saw previously, he discussed that some politicians see a balance of trade. It has to be a balance. If I'm helping France sell its products, then I'm going to maybe create a deficit. However, I will be earning some money from carrying the product, right, for them. And I'm not going to shadow the produce of my own goods because it's some things that we're not competing on, right? So why do we do that? Well, that's because we just want them to lose, right? So maybe it's a skewed argument, right? It's stupidity, as he says. Um, yeah, and those are the things that I wrote down from last time. Um, I suppose actually that's it from the last time, and yeah. So now we finished what is supposedly the interview, and then we have to go into where do we go from here, right? So that's the question for next time. Do I have a question for next time? Well, not really, because the content was not very strong in this podcast. I have to be honest. I really have to be honest about that. Um, Therefore, I suppose I don't have a question for next time. The only thing that I can think of is that I need to have a plan. I need to have a more structured thing, and I need to have uh, more content. I need more content. I need to have something that excites you guys. I need to create something where I add value, really, right? Okay. Then we go to the Q&A. Let's see if I got any questions. Um, it does not seem to be the case. And therefore, I suppose I am just going to end the podcast quite early. It was only 1 hour, and that's because we did not have an actual interview today, but only a sum up of what I've read for the past month, or at least a part of it, right? Okay, so I want to thank you all for being here, and I hope you are as excited as me for me coming back with new episodes for the podcast. Karim talks about economics, and I'm looking forward to hitting the next half of the up to the 50, right? To the 50. Let's do that. Let's do that. Okay. So thanks for watching. Karim talks about economics, and see you next time. But as per usual, I've not forgotten this thing. There is of course a motivation at the very end, and I suppose the motivation here is something um, that might, for a lot of people, seem obvious. Once I say it, it is quite obvious. However, it's something that we sometimes forget when we dwell on things, and that is that life is live. As this podcast is live, right? So is life. When you watch something, some people have done that at that exact point, but you're not watching it as they are doing it. So you're actually watching something that happened in the past, and therefore you should live in the life right now. When you read something, it's something that happened in the past. It's not how it is right now. Things change, and you can't just dwell on things for a long time, because then things would just come and go, come and go, come and go, and it's as if you're. So I feel that I'm a month behind in life, right? I'm a month behind, so I have to get back to life, and I hope you guys too are with me on that. That you have to live life live. You can't just live it on playback. You can't live it on pause, because you can't press pause, or stop and let me play it back. Let me look back at it. Let me edit this. You can't. You can't. Life is life. Now, of course, you should take some time to reflect. But remember that while you reflect, life, and that's of course a little bit stressful, but life is still going. I hope that you've enjoyed me coming back and enjoyed this podcast, regardless of the content. Maybe it's just my soothing voice that you've enjoyed. Um, Maybe something to listen to. Maybe me trying to explain these concepts has been quite interesting for you, or maybe you're just sitting there, how can he do this? How does he know how the central bank chairman works? The rotation of the chairman works, right? So yeah, until I see you next time. I'm gonna put my finger up as per usual to see when the podcast ends.